Welcome to the Seraphim plenary session at COP26. ESG, the case for space. I'm Rob Desborough, I'm managing partner at Seraphim Space, and I'm CEO of Seraphim Space Camp, our startup accelerator program. Today, I'm going to talk to you about the case for space. I'm going to introduce Seraphim, the leading space investor globally. We're going to talk about why space, why now, and the impact that space data can have on our environment and the climate. We're going to talk through investment activity in terms of venture capital investment into this exciting new area for startups. And I'm going to introduce you to some of the leading startups out there who are addressing climate change. We're then going to have a really exciting panel session where we come together with those startups and also other investor members of our community. So to kick things off, I'm going to introduce Seraphim. So Seraphim is the leading investor globally into SpaceTech startups. We floated the fund on the London Stock Exchange in July of this year. We supported over 70 SpaceTech startups globally, and we're supporting those companies from seed stage to IPO. We're investing hundreds of thousands of dollars and also tens of millions of dollars into later stage startups. And 3 of our companies have now reached unicorn status. That is, they are now worth billions of dollars and have floated on the NASDAQ and New York Stock Exchange. And our portfolio has raised over 1.2 billion of investment. As a venture capital fund and a space tech focused fund, ESG is very much at the forefront of our investment policy and our activities. We are members of the venture capital group at the United Nations-backed Principles of Responsible Investment. So, why space and what is the role that it has to play in terms of the climate agenda? So space has a unique role to play in addressing the world's most pressing problems. There's unanimous agreement that the space sector is in a long-term, high-growth trajectory that will see it grow into a multi-trillion-dollar industry in the next 10 to 20 years. The world's leading entrepreneurs, tech companies, and investment banks all agree on this. Space is not just about tourism or rockets. It's about looking down, not up, and addressing critical problems on Earth. Space-derived data will have a massive impact on how we manage our planet. We may see news headlines about space billionaires and flying into space, but it's actually the technologies that these billion-dollar entrepreneurs have produced from the companies like Blue Origin, SpaceX, and Virgin Orbit that are the real story here. Because of these advances in technology, we are seeing a paradigm shift in the economics of space. And there's 2 drivers that have reduced costs from between 100 to 1,000 times. Firstly, SpaceX has produced reusable rockets that are dramatically reducing the cost of launch. If you go back to the 1980s and look at the Space Shuttle, the Challenger program, cost of launch was about $80,000 per kilo. Now, with SpaceX and Falcon Heavy, we're looking at the cost is less than $1,000 per kilo. And NASA are predicting by 2040 that we'll be looking at tens of dollars per kilo. The second driver here is Moore's law is now doing for space tech what it has done for computing. Smartphones are now more powerful than the computer that sent man to the moon. The outcome is we're building satellites that fit in the palm of your hand. It's costing us $1 million now to build and launch a satellite into space. Historically, we'd be looking at costs of $500 million per satellite. Why is this important? Because it means we can build a new digital infrastructure in the sky. Global scale challenges need global scale solutions, and the space sector with this infrastructure has a critical role to play in addressing these issues. New space economics mean you can deploy constellations of satellites for a fraction of the cost that wasn't possible historically. This infrastructure is making it feasible to pass over every single point of the Earth every hour. It's enabling cutting-edge sensors to capture novel information about the Earth in exquisite detail and in close to real time, from the individual object level all the way up to global scale. These new data sets of enormous scale, diversity, and depth hold the potential to open up entirely new insights that could transform virtually every sector, enable us to really understand our whole Earth ecosystem. So space is providing a sustainable way to do more with less. Space data and connectivity is now making it possible to measure, model, and predict whole Earth systems. The Earth observation, remote sensing, and analytics market is now worth $5 billion. We're utilizing sensor technologies from space, looking at radio signal data, looking at radar, looking at infrared detection, multispectral and optical sensors. These sensors are providing a more powerful global view of climate data and environmental science. Space is therefore playing an increasingly central role in climate action and ESG reporting. It's providing key information on which mitigating strategies and policies can be based. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, identified Earth-observing satellites as critical in monitoring the causes and effects of climate change. So how is space actually driving to net zero? Well, greenhouse gas monitoring. We're using space satellites to identify and monitor emissions at their source anywhere on Earth. Food security. With space-derived data, we can do farm-level traceability, monitoring and managing every cow, every sheep, from the farm to the supermarket, monitoring illegal fishing and deforestation, improving crop yields with weather, soil, moisture, and crop health data, supply-demand optimization, monitoring the global supply chain, including mining, ground transport, shipping, and port activity, as well as the activities that create demand, such as building demolitions and construction. Renewable energy, monitoring the energy usage of, the identification of optimal sites for renewable energy solutions, accurate weather predictive analytics. We're modeling our planet, the retreat of glaciers, sea level rises, levels of deforestation worldwide. All of these areas of activity are now being impacted by space-derived data and that digital infrastructure in the sky. So what is driving this growth in space tech venture capital? Well, we're seeing 7.6 billion a year is being invested into space tech companies globally. 2021 is set to be a record year for investment into space tech. We've already seen 7.6 billion has been invested this year. Last year was 7.6 billion in total. Of that 7.6 billion, 530 million has been invested into climate-focused space tech companies by venture capitalists globally. But that remaining 7 billion is being invested into the infrastructure that is supporting those climate-focused investments. whether that is launch or whether that is downlink and ground stations. And here I've highlighted just a few of the key movers we've seen over the last period. As you can see, we're seeing investments in the tens to hundreds of millions going into space tech startups focused on the climate. These companies cover everything from thermal detection and methane emission detections to weather prediction and analytics and climate risk and assessment and mitigation technologies as well. And now I'm delighted to introduce you to some of those leading companies today who are really impacting on how we're going to monitor and manage our climate. We're going to see presentations from 4 pioneering entrepreneurs who are building the game-changing startups that are the future of predicting and managing climate risk and impact. Collectively, these companies have raised nearly $200 million from global venture capital funds to address the climate problems that we're facing. ICEYE is a Finnish company, but they're working globally. It's potentially the #1 space-focused startup in Europe, and they've raised over $150 million. Satellite View have raised $25 million. They're essentially looking to be the Earth's thermometer, building level thermal footprinting. PlanetWatchers is looking at space-derived data analytics, taking that data from satellite constellations and generating meaningful insight in terms of change detection, change mapping, and particularly focusing on the insurance industry and crop insurance specifically. Sust has just closed a $3 million round, and they're looking at how, with geospatial insight, you can mitigate against climate risk at asset level. These are some of the most exciting companies at an early stage we're seeing, and I'm now delighted to hand over them for them to present individually their opportunities. Thank you very much, and we'll see you shortly.
Well, hello, everybody. My name is Steve Young. I'm the Vice President of Business Development and Sales for ICEYE. ICEYE is a company based out of Finland with offices in the US, the UK, Poland, and Spain. We are a company that a few years ago innovated a new low-cost but high-performance radar to go onto very small satellites. The reason that that is important is those radars allow us to see all sorts of details on the Earth's surface, no matter what the time of day or night, and no matter what the weather. So we can see through the clouds, we can see at nighttime, we can pick up all sorts of features and changes that are going on over the globe. And we can do that on a very regular and repeatable basis. The way that we are now using those satellites is to launch what we term a constellation of small satellites. That means many satellites, several. In fact, we've launched up to 14 so far. And those satellites are coordinated in their orbits. So they enable us to cover any point on the globe every few hours. And indeed, we've got something that is technically called coherent ground track repeat. It's a bit of a mouthful, I know, but what it means is that we are able to fly the satellites over the same track on the ground very, very precisely every 24 hours. That means that we can detect changes, sometimes down to the millimeter level on the Earth's surface. And we can do that day in, day out, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. So this really has delivered over the last year or so a capability to view what is happening on the surface of our planet that simply has never been available before. For example, we have been monitoring deforestation around various places on the globe and are able to track it very, very precisely on a daily basis. We have enabled a product that looks at flooding, flood depth, and monitoring the world's floods and various cities and locations around the planet at the high water mark and the extent of the flood and how many buildings are flooded and so on. So the capability that this is now beginning to deliver really is something that we've never had before, and it is providing a source of ground truth that has never been available so easily and so easily accessible before. And all of that has been enabled by the innovation in this low-cost radar technology and got into space on small satellites, which now enables us to provide this amazing capability. And this is just the start of what we're doing. We're finding ever more useful purposes for this data, and the fact that we can repeatedly collect it hour after hour, day after day, means that we can provide a consistent and reliable and very accurate source of truth data for what is going on the surface of the planet. And as we all know, there are many changes occurring, and ICEYE is now at the forefront of the ability to track those changes and deliver real meaningful capability like flood monitoring or deforestation monitoring or any other such use application. So thank you very much for listening about ICEYE. A lot going on in this organization and a lot that we've developed over the last few years, and this is just the start of being able to see what is going on the surface of the planet every few hours. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Anthony Baker, CEO and founder of Satellite View. I've spent 20 years in the satellite business, helping to build and exit billion-dollar satellite companies. Satellite View is going to launch a unique constellation of Earth observation satellites with an infrared camera that can image any building on the planet. And this has a great application in addressing our challenge to getting to net zero. Every company and country has the same problem. They don't know their carbon footprint today. They don't know where to spend their first funding to make things better. And over the long term, did any fixes actually work? Satellite View has the answer. We're effectively the world's thermometer. We have the backing of British venture capital to make sure that we launch in next year in October. Infrared is a new category of Earth observation. You might have seen mapping applications on the internet that show you the outside of structures, but infrared gives you an inference of what's going on inside. So we can see economic activity of batteries, and we can see the emissions from buildings and where the energy is actually being wasted. So we can direct people to go and fix it. We're launching our next satellite in October next year. We've already raised £18 million to fund that activity. We have exclusivity on the technology, and we're building our own IP for applications of this infrared data. We're looking for people who want to use our data and develop applications to address climate change. Come and join us.
Hi, I'm Don. I'm the CEO of PlanetWatchers. We are changing the crop insurance industry from within. We do this by automatically and accurately capturing crop insurance data at both speed and at scale. And we do this through the analysis of synthetic aperture radar, or SAR for short, which provides 100% visibility by seeing through clouds and poor lighting, while being incredibly sensitive to the physical properties of crops and the changes that come throughout the season. In short, we're turning months of manual data collection into minutes of automated analysis. But value is what matters most to our customers, and it's what matters most to us as well as a business. And we provide exceptional value in two key areas. Firstly, policy data. The USDA requires that farmers report how much of what they've planted, and where they have planted all of their crops by the 15th of July every single year. It takes the crop insurance industry up to 6 weeks after that date to get all of that data collected into a single system to understand what it is they're actually insuring. We can provide all of that data more accurately and far more quickly. We deliver this data before July 1st, something that's been described as game-changing from the crop insurance industry. And the data we provide is up to 14% more accurate because we're removing manual errors from the process. A win-win. And when we look at claims data, A great example would be the derecho of 2020, which hit Iowa and Illinois in August last year. It took the industry more than 4 months of adjustment to understand the damage that they had occurred and the costs associated with it. And it cost the industry more than $87.5 million to reach that conclusion. And that's just in pure muddy boots in the dirt salary costs. The analysis we ran over that event, we delivered in under a single week. It's 16 times faster than the manual processes in place right now. It costs less than 1% in comparison to those manual costs. And when it comes to arbitration claims, we can provide a 12 times saving on the cost of arbitration cases. And of course, we've looked for field validation to support what we do. And what we do has been described as phenomenally accurate by the crop insurers who've sent literally muddy boots to those fields to look at the analysis that we have run based on our damage maps. Something that again is changing the industry from within. Thank you very much.
Hi, my name's Josh Gilbert and I'm the co-founder and CEO at Sust Global. We're a geospatial satellite data startup transforming complex climate science into easy to understand and credible climate insights for financial institutions, investors, and enterprise corporates. So at COP26, there's going to be many, many promises from world leaders, celebrities, corporate CEOs, NGOs from across the board, telling us how we're going to get to net zero over the next 10, 20, 30-year time horizons. Unfortunately, many of these promises are perceived as ringing hollow. We really hope for a big change at COP26, but we need to go even further than these promises, even if we're guaranteeing that these promises are going to be delivered upon. If everybody sticks to the pledges they've made so far, we're looking at about 2 degrees warming of our planet. If we go beyond that, and we need to go beyond that to hit the 1.5 degree targets, we're going to need to look at the ways not just we address things like net zero and doing transition risk and viewing all of these things across corporations, but we also need to understand at the asset level the impact that the climate has on our physical assets, as well as the impact that those physical assets have on the planet through their carbon emissions profiles. So at Sust Global, we bring in satellite data, geospatial data, and forward-looking global climate models, and we transform them using deep learning techniques to produce insights on both the impact of the planet on industry and physical assets, for example, wildfires, flooding, sea level rise, and cyclones, and also the emissions output of these industrial assets and the impact that they will have on the planet. So, for example, SO2 emissions, NO2 emissions, and CO2 emissions. We've developed a unique end-to-end platform that can provide both of these outputs to large financial institutions, data providers, and corporates, allowing them not just to understand what's happening to their assets from a business optimization and strategic perspective, but also to disclose real, validated, and credible climate data. Today, many of the emissions profiles, if you're looking at scope 1, scope 2, or scope 3 emissions, are built off of carbon accounting processes, where you look at the balance sheet or the profit and loss statements of a company, and you work out maybe in the ballpark of how many kilograms of CO2 are emitted into the atmosphere. Unfortunately, these methods aren't just inaccurate, they're also massively out of date. So they're annual, and therefore there's always a lag of 12 to 18 months. At Sust Global, we integrate the latest climate science, high resolution, near real-time satellite imagery, and various geospatial and ground-based sensor data sets to bring high cadence, high quality data, which brings these insights to around every 2 weeks, immediate from the moment that these gases are emitted into the air, as well as multiple scenarios that we can analyze for forward-looking climate risks to allow companies not just to understand their emissions, but also how to adapt to the changing climate. Over the past 2 years, we've gone on an incredible journey. Along the way, we've worked with programs like the Seraphim Space Accelerator or the Seraphim Space Camp, which we've loved working with and were brilliant in connecting us to some of the industry's leading corporates, investors, and partners along the way. We've also worked with Accenture's FinTech Innovation Labs, and last week we were delighted to announce our first round of external funding, which is a $3.2 million fundraising round led by Hambro Perks, with participation from investors across the UK and the US. So as we go into COP26, we're really excited to not just engage with our existing customers and partners, but to speak to new ones and understand where are the most urgent problems and where are the most urgent opportunities in terms of the green transition. We believe that we're at a pivot point in human history. And yes, it's scary. Yes, there's a lot of big numbers and lots of difficult targets to achieve. But we believe that through transparent, credible, and accessible climate data, as well as concerted action and sticking to the promises that we're making in these 2 weeks, we can get there and not just build a better version of our existing world, but really create a new one that has climate integrated within the very fabric of business and finance, not just an exogenous variable that kind of gets brought into financial models or kind of is delivered as a climate value at risk score where nobody really understands what it means. But we bring it into every single business activity where it's not even talked about as climate anymore. It's just integrated as an everyday part of our workflows, because that's what we have to do. So at COP26, please do speak to us. We're going to be speaking at another couple of panels here, live in person and in Glasgow, as well as get in contact with Sust Global at sustglobal.com or through Seraphim Capital. We would love to speak with you. We'd love to engage with you. We'd love to show you more about how geospatial climate data is really driving the next generation of TCFD reporting, SFDR reporting, GRESB, SASB, all of the alphabet soup, but ultimately turning all of this complicated procedures into a really seamless, easy, validated, and credible stance on climate risk and climate data. My name is Josh Gilbert, the CEO at Sust Global. Thank you very much for your time and enjoy the conference.
Thank you, everyone, for those fantastic pitches, which really brought to life the case for space and climate impact. We are now going to be moving on to our panel discussion, which is all around climate impact and space-derived data. As you can see, we have been joined by our startup pitchers. We've got Steve Young, Vice President of Business Development at ICEYE, Anthony Baker, CEO and founder of Satellite View, Dominic Edmonds, CEO of PlanetWatchers, Josh Gilbert, CEO and co-founder of Sust Global. Thank you for your pitches. We have also been joined by Izzy Gordon, investment analyst from Hambro Perks, the lead investor into Sust Global. So for the first question I would like to put to our startups, how does your technology help play a role in climate change that couldn't be addressed previously? And Steve, perhaps this is the first question to you.
Thank you, Rob. The technology ICEYE has developed enables us now to see the changes that are happening on the Earth's surface, no matter what they be, whether they be deforestation or glaciers moving or oil spill tracking, for example. It allows us to see those and measure those very, very accurately on a daily basis, no matter where they are on the planet, no matter the time of day or night, or no matter where the weather. And that ability has simply not been available before.
And that question, back to the floor. Anthony, perhaps you could kick off.
Yes, thank you, Rob. So our technology can measure the heat emissions from any building in the planet. So we can find out where people are wasting energy. So this is going to be really useful for anyone who's declaring net zero, because most people haven't a clue of what their emissions are today, and they don't know where to put their first investment to make things better, to upgrade their buildings. And over the long term, did it make any difference? So this new insight will steer people, decision makers, investors, everybody to make better decisions to reach their net zero goals.
Thanks, Anthony. And now, Dominic.
I think in terms of understanding the impact that PlanetWatchers can have, we need to also understand the context of what's happening to the planet at this moment in time. So we are a synthetic aperture radar analysis business. But if you look at the data coming through from the US agency NOAA, it will tell you since 1980, we've seen, I believe it is 7 single billion-dollar weather events every single year in the US. However, if you look since 2015, that number is more than doubled to 15.1 single billion-dollar weather events every single year. So it's grown by 115% in effectively the past 5 years. So being able to monitor the impact of those events for industries such as agriculture and insurance, as well as clearly a big part of the business model that we have, but also looking further afield into the monitoring of sustainability practices such as cover crops, tillage within the agricultural world, are all key contributors to this climate challenge that we're facing at this moment in time.
Thanks, Dom. And now over to you, Josh.
So the two things that Sust Global bring are accessibility and credibility.
So, for example, Satellite View and PlanetWatchers, bringing in amazing SAR data, amazing thermal imagery, and many of the new satellites that are being launched into space today, capturing all of this data, but really digesting all of that data and transforming it into something that the end customers can use is something that's really important. So at Sust, we transform complex climate science into credible climate data. So that's something that maybe a financial analyst will be able to integrate into their day-to-day workflows, or maybe a corporate can then integrate into their strategic planning, or maybe even their regulatory reporting, such as TCFD. And the second part is credibility. So we train all of our forward-looking global climate models, plus the near real-time emissions monitoring with satellite data that can actually create a validation layer and a bias correction layer into some of these models to make sure that when we're talking about this climate data, when we're talking about projections into the future, customers can have some confidence in terms of what the data actually says and how they can actually implement that in a real world business relevant case.
Thank you all for bringing to life the impact that startups are currently having on climate change. It's really exciting, the opportunities that we're discussing today. So ICEYE, we've heard from startups about these exciting commercial opportunities. From your perspective, why should we as investors be looking to back these types of opportunities?
So one of the big things that we've really been empowered to deploy in terms of investment recently, and particularly through our investment into Sust with Josh, has been around the fact that for a very long time, the onus really on delivering climate change has been on the individual. And in many ways, in terms of collective power, that should really have sat with corporations. Now, COP26 is a really good example of how that tide is starting to change. But throughout the last 10 years, there's been a massive disconnect between large sets of data that could provide insight and corporate businesses that are in-house relatively unable to decode this. And actually what's really exciting is all three of the businesses that you've heard from today are making a real impact on a much broader picture at a much more global scale. So I think across venture capital, every single investor is now looking to see how they can really do something in this space and how they can deliver change. And that acceleration has been much quicker in the last 2 years than it probably was in the 10 before that. So we're very excited to be doubling down into this space and really helping to invest in companies that are not only going to be incredibly successful and category defining, but are also going to have real global impact and help us deliver towards the net zero targets.
Thank you, ICEYE. And Steve, an extension of that question to you. Who are the key commercial customers for this type of data? Who do you think are going to be the early adopters for these data sets?
Yeah, good question. The commercial customers, so governments are often extremely interested, as you can imagine, in understanding exactly what's going on, particularly when you see things like deforestation and oil spills or flooding. But you also then get companies like insurance companies very interested in flood extent and depth monitoring. That enables very much quicker claims to be settled and people to get rehoused and so on after a bad flood. But there are also many other applications. I've mentioned oil spill tracking before. That's an obvious one. Clearly the oil companies and transporters are very interested in that. There are also very many other use cases. And the commercial interest across the planet now in understanding the truth and the changes and exactly what is happening, the number of commercial organizations is widespread. It's quite difficult to count them all, to be honest.
One of the industries that Steve mentioned there is insurance. We have particular experience in the insurance industry, although a niche market within it being the world of crop insurance. And the use case here is quite telling when you consider the climate impact. If you to look at the crop insurance industry, which is underpinned by manual processes, meaning that when a large-scale weather event hits Iowa or Illinois or wherever it may be in the US, it takes months to collect all of that data. You know, we're talking about sending out adjusters who have to look at fields, walk fields, start to run some form of assessment, which can only ever be wrong because they can't see all of the field in a single instance. Yeah, it takes months. It's very costly and it's very, very slow. So being able to bring technology in to speed up the process, understand the impact of these climate-related weather events, and get money into the pockets of farmers a lot faster is one of the things that we're seeing as a particular interesting use case when you consider certainly the environmental aspects of ESG.
And Josh, over to you.
I think, we've mentioned flooding and agriculture here, and I think they're both super relevant use cases. I think One of the things that we're trying to do as well is to bring in some of the forward-looking data. So obviously satellite data provides an amazing and important view in terms of what's happening right now. And certainly these new types of sensors can see many, many new different nuances and actually provide real value to farmers today. One of the things that we've seen is, for example, how not just flooding, but also drought can affect agricultural assets or even insurance in the future, where if you have credible and accessible climate data in terms of how does this place look in 10 years time, in 20 years time, in 30 years time, in 80 years time, many of these companies or investors that are holding these assets, or even the farmers that maybe they're family-owned businesses, can then start to plan and adapt and build in resiliency into their assets where maybe they haven't yet been impacted by climate change today, but they will be in the future.
Thanks, Josh. Anthony.
Yeah, so picking up on the insurance, so we've had a lot of interest from insurance companies for particularly the categorization of buildings. So seeing whether they've insured a library or a Pizza Hut, and because they're a completely different category of insurance risk, but also occupancy. So they don't want to see unoccupied buildings. And our high resolution data, which is throughout the day and night, can help determine whether that's the case. And then that data set is useful for councils who are trying to, rather than rebuild buildings, they want owners to let them out so that it doesn't inflate the price of accommodation. And then in general, the councils and investment asset holders are interested in where their first building is. They've got a carbon mandate, so if they can find the worst emitting building and upgrade that, they can put their limited resources to the biggest problems as soon as possible. So we've been concentrating a lot on the building side and cities, but then all of a sudden you find out that looking at our data, you can see pollution as well. So if a river goes through a factory or an industrial complex and it comes out the other side a lot hotter, something's happened in that process. Now, some factories are allowed to heat or discharge certain effluents, but there's no easy way of monitoring it. But from space, you can see it, every estuary, every river, and you can get an instant view on what's happening there. And a third category, going back to the cities again, is we all see on hot days that the city seems a lot warmer than the rural areas, and these are heat islands. So you can see these from space today from some of the weather satellites. But when you look at our data, you can identify which building is contributing the most of that. So then people can go and paint the building white to reflect some of the heat, or put plants around, which obviously improves the lifestyle of the city as well. So we're not just saving energy, but there could be a better environment for everybody.
Well, thank you all for really bringing to life the economic benefits to businesses for adopting this kind of data and this approach as well. So, ICEYE, at Seraphim, we are very much focused on space startups. This is our heartland, it's what we do. But from your perspective as a generalist investor, is this a trend you're starting to see in the market? Are you starting to increasingly look at climate-related and impact-related opportunities?
Yes, thanks, Rob. I think what's been really exciting for us is that actually, as a generalist investor, the entire market is moving from more traditional venture capital targets to actually an overlay of impact investing and traditional investing in technology. So everything we do now is for the good. The baseline is at least contributions of positive impact in ESG in some ways. In the best cases, you have companies like Sust and Josh, where really the core bread and butter of what they're doing is not only going to be incredibly successful and category defining, but is also going to really deliver transformative global change across climate. A couple of the things that Don mentioned around agriculture. So this is a particularly exciting industry for me as a personal investor. In 2019, there was 3 times as much venture capital investment in food technology and last mile than there was in agricultural technology. Now, agriculture has been the oldest industry globally and a backbone of a lot of what we do everywhere. And figuring this out with technology is incredibly effective. So it's starting to be a space where there's more and more investments. There have recently been some really exciting big growth funds across Europe that have been raised by transformative agricultural investors. But the last 18 months, there's been a far greater proliferation than there really was in the 10 years before that. So it's really exciting to see the entire market move from generalized investing towards positive impact investing across everything they do. And I really believe that that's where venture capital is moving, but also that we are somewhat as a subsector of the investment industry, a trailblazer for that. I think it's happening with us in a lot of places, and we'd like the rest of the market to move with us. So it's very exciting and it's very relevant.
Well, that's great to hear, Izzy, but it's a general trend. It's not just an area for specialist investors like ourselves. And now back to the startups. All of you have been actively fundraising. The startups, you're always going to be fundraising. Do you think that with the increasing interest in ESG and impact, and having that as a part of any investment portfolio, do you think that has helped your investor story as you've looked to raise funds in the past and will do in the future? Perhaps Anthony.
Absolutely. So we've tried to keep a balance between the industries, but definitely the impact side, ESG, we're getting most of the interest from customers on that built environment. And so having investors that not only believe in your story, but can make connections is super important to us. And it's on everybody's agenda, the net zero, everybody's declaring it. I think a lot of, and at a very high level, so it's sort of a board level issue. So there's big money behind this. There's a massive opportunity, and there needs to be a lot of innovation to address this. And I think, startups is a good place to start.
Thanks, Anthony. And Josh, as a company that has a presence in both Silicon Valley and the UK, perhaps you could give a US perspective as well as a UK one.
Yeah, it's ESG and the excitement around climate is obviously super important, and we are at a pivot point in history. Like climate today is seen by many as kind of an exogenous kind of variable, and climate this or climate that. In 5-10 years' time, the companies that are on this panel and many of the others, we will just be an integral part of business and finance, and we won't talk about climate X and sustainability Y. It'll be really embedded deeply within every single thing that goes on. I think at the moment, it's a great time to be a climate startup, but we're really committed as well to kind of making sure that we separate signal versus noise. ESG is a very, very broad term, and it kind of means anything to anybody. Like environment, social, and governance are wrapped up together when maybe they shouldn't necessarily be. So I think for investors, it's a really exciting time, but we're just making sure we find the right partners that actually aren't kind of following the hype cycle, who are really kind of all in, not just in terms of understanding the end customers and supporting us in terms of maybe some of those introductions to other investors as we move towards our Series A in kind of 3Q next year. But really kind of understanding that this industry is nascent and it's evolving, and there's so much more that's going to evolve and unpack within it. So, credible climate data, whether it's through geospatial data and data analytics here, or, thermal imagery or SAR-based imagery to see through clouds, as the sun is doing right now, burning into my retina. It's a really, really good time to be raising capital as a climate startup.
And Dom, over to you.
So I agree with everything that's been said thus far. I mean, we're all in alignment that there is a lot of money out there when it comes to climate tech, truthfully. And yes, that's terrific when you're in the climate space. But the one thing that does scare me a little bit with that volume of money is the degree of bandwagoning and tokenism that can come with it. It's one thing to be a climate tech business, as I think we can all agree. It's another to call yourself a climate tech business. And that's what I'm conscious of in the market. Whether you are looking to raise or present yourself, spin as part of this, and conscious that there are businesses out there who maybe their heart and soul isn't in this area, but they're kind of clinging on by the fingertips, just on the edge, to try and get those dollars through the door. So yeah, there's a lot of interest. It's a frothy market, certainly. So it does help from a raising standpoint. But We just need to make sure that everyone's true and honest about this. This isn't just a deployment of capital under an ESG name. It's actually deployment of capital makes a difference.
Yeah, Dom, I think you make a really good point in terms of the different startups in all of the areas, and maybe some that are on the bandwagon in terms of climate and ESG and sustainability. And certainly we want everybody on the bandwagon. We want to be driving forwards sustainable change in a meaningful way. But also the truth will out. The hype will ease somewhat at some point, and really we will see where the really committed change makers are, and where are the people that are kind of in it for a quick buck, or kind of in it to raise money now because there's a lot of dry powder, and it's a great kind of environment for a founder to be raising. So I completely agree with you, but I think over time, climate change is a multi-decadal problem, and I think that all of our solutions are going to be multi-decadal solutions. So I think this is the start of a very exciting journey in terms of the climate startups that we're seeing come through today.
Picking up on the greenwashing, so buildings contribute 40% of all carbon emissions, and my fear that there could be some misrepresentation on some of the upgrades. So if the government subsidizes a building to have a new heat pump, did it actually happen? Was it the quality that was required? Does it work over the long term? So our technology can help in that particular case. But I think Earth observation as a whole and the products that Josh is developing can look down supply chains. So if you buy something from a shoe shop and it's made in the Far East, is that factory as green as it claims to be? Earth observation can have a view there. You can have a view on the shop that it's been sold in, and it can help investors make sure that they're buying into truly green products and truly green investments, rather than just what people are making claims.
Good message there, Dom, on maintaining credibility in our ecosystem and being aware of greenwashing and the impact that can have. ICEYE, as venture capital funds, we're always out fundraising as well. Does ESG play a role, do you think, in your fundraising going forwards?
I think it's never played more of a role. I think it's one of the things that we end up talking about the most. It's one of the areas we've accelerated through very quickly in terms of how we reshaped our thinking over the last 2 years. But I also think Dominic raised some really interesting points around greenwashing versus climate tech. And I think there's an onus on the venture capital community to become more discerning around this. So there is one camp, which is that pretty much every startup we back needs to be committed to ESG. And I guess the lowest level of bar is being on a net zero journey, at least, or starting from a net zero standpoint and being relatively responsible custodians of other people and of how you deliver services and employ people. I totally understand the greenwashing point, and I think it's for us to be aware of that. But I do think there are relatively two separate camps, which is there are startups trying to do something to impact other companies in this space, such as you all. And there are startups trying to do something very different, in a very different market, but who are also trying to be committed towards actually delivering at least neutrality. And I think it's on us as venture capital investors to become better at that in terms of maybe where we stand in how the broader market is moving. You're seeing a lot of flow from corporates who, not just corporations, but most large enterprises or organizations, whether it's governmental or whatever. There has been over the last 2 years a consciousness that they need to do something. COP26 is going to be a really interesting kind of social activity. I think you'll see pretty much every CEO from every big company walking, getting a train, getting a fuel carbon neutral aeroplane to that part of Glasgow. But actually, what it's doing is accelerating the need to shift from where they are now, which is operational awareness at a corporate level, but limited internal know-how of how to deploy that, to a 5-year horizon where actually a lot of investment will not only go into their own internal solutions, but will go into the ecosystem, to a 10-year view where actually everyone's going to have to understand the risk associated with their supply chains. In 10 years, it's very difficult to know right now what the entire world is going to look like in terms of supply chain and where the disruption is going to be. I mean, in 2019 alone, there was 230 billion in corporate losses due to climate impact on supply chains. That's massive and growing at a hugely accelerated rate. And I think one of the reasons why we were so excited to back Josh and to lead the round in Sust is because we identified a company that's really going to be able to help these corporations move through this 10-year journey. And that is incredibly powerful because right now it's a complete black box to them.
Brilliant. Thank you, Izzy. So, some fantastic insight there. And a final question to the floor. What do you think could be the single biggest event or impact from COP26 that could help shape the future of this exciting area? What would you like to see happen? And Anthony, perhaps you could kick us off.
I think from a policy point of view, the carbon tax is obviously going to be a big one. So if polluting fuels cost more, then that will drive big business. But I think from a personal level, I would hope that everyone comes away and asks a question of what the impact of things I buy, where I shop. And the problem is right now that this isn't the data. So I can pick up a tin of soup and find out how many calories are on it, but I can't pick up a tin of soup and find out the carbon impact or the difference between different supermarkets or the office that I work at. It's difficult to find that. And, as a startup, we've been trying to look at our carbon footprint and it's been difficult to calculate. And I think the motivation from this is the awareness that if people ask, what is the carbon footprint of everything I use? We can put things in proportion. We can address the biggest issues first. And I hope that big awareness comes out of COP26.
Thanks, Anthony. Dom.
I think one of the things for me when I look at the COP26 event, and the timing's really important. So we are coming through, still in, but hopefully coming through the most seismic event of our lifetimes, being the pandemic. And it's taught us all a lot about ourselves, certainly, but it's also taught us a lot about what we can and can't do without. We all saw the headlines during the deep midst of lockdowns in terms of air quality, in terms of general pollution reduction, and a real opportunity to reset some of the decisions we're making. And yet here we are coming out the other side of it, and the headlines will all be about there's no more red list for traveling. We can all go to Greece, so we can go wherever we want. It's like, isn't that kind of the opposite of where we were when we were praising the fact that we were making some significant strides forward with travel and so forth? I also think there's a lot of individualism, which we've all got very accustomed to. I'm sure, again, through the pandemic, we all saw on our streets, how many times a day did we see the same grocery vans coming back 3 or 4 different days a week, delivering to neighbours? That could have been one delivery for the whole street. Generally, it's just timing. We become so selfish as individuals in that sense. Again, how many times does Amazon visit your street on a daily basis? Or the delivery drivers of them, certainly. So I'd like to see us actually getting a grip on collectively working for the good rather than individually working for it, because as individuals, we can't make a difference. As collectively, we can.
Josh.
I think there are a lot of good things about COP26 and obviously having climate so far up the global agenda right now, and there's going to be celebrities and world leaders and NGOs and governments and prime ministers and presidents all attending COP26, and that's great. But to an extent, I don't care. I think talk is cheap. I think there's going to be a lot of promises that are made at COP26. There's a lot of investors coming into ESG, which is great. But really, it's the next 5 years, it's the next 10 years, it's the delivery of those promises and the commitment to those promises once the dust settles, once the kind of shine of COP26 wears off, that I think really is the most impactful thing. So it's kind of the legacy of COP, and really we need to decide, are we here for the hubris? Are we here for the kind of photo moment? I know Glasgow is kind of teeming with people and it's a scrum to get around anywhere. But let's really think about what the outcomes are and the delivery of many of these promises, because I think it's great to make these promises, but, talk is cheap and we've got a long way to go.
Thanks, Josh. Izzy?
I think you can take a lot of what Josh said in what I'm going to say now. So excuse me if you think we're kind of on the same tune here, but I guess the way that I see this is a massive event and a massive opportunity for education of people with real power. So there is a real awareness in the market that stuff needs to be done on this. As I mentioned before, there is a massive disconnect between a large wealth of data that will provide really informative instructional output and individuals who are able to deploy that output. And what I hope is going to happen from the conference is that there will be a sense of education where real concrete targets, plans, collective action, knowledge sharing is going to be put into place. So obviously talk is very cheap, and I do think quite a lot of these events can be relatively promotional for everyone. You can't go through LinkedIn right now without seeing a COP26 thing for every company that you follow. But equally, it's a real opportunity to make some concrete dialogue changes. The thing that I think will be really impactful is understanding after this which of the companies that attended are committing to go over and above the base level. So ESG reporting that's mandatory and governmental in terms of regulation is a baseline, and everyone attending that conference and not needs to be aiming far above that. Those that can put that into practice and can use the technology that all three of you have presented today to do so, A, are going to be the real winners, and B, are going to be the ones making the most difference. But everyone should be lifting up together. And this is a great opportunity for the kind of writing to be put on the wall about that. Going the extra mile is going to be key to everyone's corporate strategy for the next 10 years. So that's my hope for the conference. It's really about understanding and commitment and concrete action.
I think the understanding that monitoring the various changes that are going on and having an ability to have a set of data that is a single source of truth that is measured very, very accurately, whether that be changes to the deforestation or ice moving or whatever other it might be, wildfires or flooding or whatever that might be, but having a source of data that provides very accurate measurement about the truth, I think is going to be fundamental for us to understand what is changing and how fast and what impact we're having on the measures we're taking to try and reduce climate change. So having COP come out with 26 come out with something that says we will have a set of data that we can all rely on that is the truth as to exactly what's going on, I think would be very valuable for all concerned.
Thanks, Izzy. So I think that there may be regulatory change. There will be a lot of publicity, a lot of noise, but talk is cheap. And ultimately, we need a collective awareness of our own responsibilities here. And that can lead to, hopefully, a fantastic legacy and an opportunity for brilliant innovation, which you've all demonstrated today, and investment as well. I'd like to thank you all very much for participating in today's conversation. I think it's incredible that across the screen, you represent nearly $200 million of venture capital investment that is going into companies that are looking to address issues within climate change. So thank you very much today.